Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the breakout group on improving consistency in the review process. This group is part of the 17 lead reviewers meeting that, as all you know, started yesterday with the plenary group and presentations and discussions. So the improving consistency in the review process, more or less have half of you participating today in the morning, because it will be a second session on consistency, a breakout group in the afternoon. This was organized by the Secretariat to allow you all lead reviewers to participate due to different time zones. Want to introduce first the Secretariat here working together with you, supporting this meeting. It's my colleague Claudia Dovale, it's my colleague Kirsten Baule here, and me supporting the discussions. Also, we have a very a known lead reviewer acting today as a resource person on behalf of the Secretariat is Maria Jose Lopez, Pepa, for many of you that worked with her. And we have the honor to have two of the most known and prominent lead reviewers as co-facilitators of this meeting, of these discussions regarding consistency in the review process. Is Olia Glade from New Zealand and Dario Gomez from Argentina. Let me remind you that we have in our agenda 9 technical issues that were provided already in advance to you through the discussion paper. There are 9 technical issues that are coming, as you know, from the surveys that we did, and we collected your views on which of the issues should be included in these discussions. Also from the experience of the Secretariat, coming from quality control and quality assurance processes. All these 9 issues are problems of consistency, are perceived as a problems of consistency in the treatment of submissions of parties and how they are treated in review reports. So it's very important that you concentrate yourself in the technical issues and your views as reviewers, not as parties, because most of you may be at the same time experts, but also at the same time expert reviewers and at the same time compilers. Please act as a reviewer, think in your colleagues, think of you making the review of certain of these particular issues. So I'm showing now the first 4, and then later the last 5 the issues that we will consider during this meeting. It is a challenge. This is the reason that I am asking you to be absolutely pragmatic, technical sound. We don't need here discussions on language, editorial issues, or other type of minor, non-substantive concepts to be discussed during this breakout group. The co-facilitators will lead us to the goal of these discussions, that is to reach conclusions on each of the elements presented in the screen. However, as you understand, we have very limited time. We are in a very different setting that is, I think it's unique in these times, trying to have a very substantive discussions in a remote mode and trying to reach conclusions. Your colleagues in the evening will take somehow stock of what you will discuss here. If there is no, let's say, consensus on some of the possible conclusions, so this will be transmitted to the second group in the evening or in the afternoon for some, or morning for some of our colleagues. And that issue, if it's not agreed here, will not be touched in the evening or in the afternoon or morning, because we need that you both two groups agreed on the conclusions. I think this is more or less what I wanted to say. Thank you very much on this, and I will show to you some a bit of housekeeping rules for these discussions, because as I mentioned, we have to be very pragmatic, very technical, and short in our discussions. We really do not need to enter in different discussions, no negotiations, because it will be impossible to have time for that. The Secretariat already prepared some possible conclusions for you, and the discussions will be really concentrated on these particular conclusions proposed. The guidance of the co-facilitators is fundamental, and you have to hear and respect how they will conduct that. At the end of these two groups, what is expected from you is to have draft conclusions, or if I may say, final conclusions from these discussions on technical issues regarding consistency that will be transmitted to the co-facilitators of the plenary group. We expect that you finish, and these conclusions will be more or less final, and will be inserted in the general conclusions of the lead reviewers meeting. You may notice that the discussions on the breakout groups are the more important and substantive part of the 17 lead reviewers meeting. So we expect that you will allocate a bit less than 20 minutes for each of the issues. Our co-facilitators will provide a bit more idea how they intend to conduct these discussions. Please try to use the live space. So when you raise your hand to make a comment, please use the raise hand button. If you want to speak, use this button, raise hand, to show that you are allowed. We are monitoring these particular actions, and then the co-facilitators will know the order of speakers asking for the floor. We are firm and trying to discourage the use the chat for having parallel discussions to the live part of this meeting of this group, because we have, as I said, our co-facilitators. One now is in Argentina, very early in the morning. Olia is in New Zealand, very late in the evening, and they need to concentrate on the discussions more than look who is asking, who is providing some comments in the chat. So if you do not have the function raise hand, you may consider to use the web version of Teams, because many of you, when using the app, may not have the raise hand button apparently appearing in your tools or in the three dots. But when you are using the web version, this commonly appears and solves problems. We tested with many lead reviewers the last year, and this was the main problem. So please use all the time the raise hand. When it's not possible at all, of course, you can send a short message that I want to speak, or I raise hand, and then we will try to monitor and transmit this to the co-facilitators. I think more or less you all know these procedures, and then I have to be more shorter, and I will invite our resource person, lead reviewer, Pepa Lopez, to make a very short introduction or 1-2 minutes on the first issue, and then answer to the questions received on this particular issue, that is the number 1. And this issue, after Pepa presenting a summary and answering to the questions, Olia and Dario will take the lead of the meeting. And please, Pepa, go ahead.
Thank you, Javier. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Pepa, and I have been working with the Secretariat to identify issues of consistency in the 2019 review cycle. So we are going to work on 9 issues that have been identified now. Maybe there are much more that were identified in previous cycles or that we could assume, but we are going to discuss about reality, about what happened in this last review cycle. So the very first one is about some parties using the 2019 refinement instead of the 2006 IPCC guidelines. And we would like you to conclude about what to do in these cases. The differences between both guidelines are new categories, are updated methods, definitions, emission factors, activity data, and parameters, and are new or more clear allocation rules. So you should think about all different cases that we could face when using the refinement instead of the 2000 IPCC guidelines. And concerning the questions received, there is one question about the fact that as a possible solution, we are proposing to the ERT to estimate the emissions using the methods in the 2006 IPCC guidelines, and then compare the results with the estimates provided by the party. Then, if there is underestimation, to provide a recommendation, and if not, if it is inside the uncertainty range of the 2006 IPCC guidelines, just to check that the party is using the refinement because it better reflects the national circumstances or and leads to more accurate, consistent, and comparable results. So the question raised was about the fact that the refinement updated parameters and emission factors only for those cases where there could be significant differences. So there are big chances of the estimates falling outside the uncertainty range of the IPCC guidelines. So in these cases, the party shouldn't use the refinement because being the estimates outside the uncertainty range means that we are not respecting one of the TAC principles, which is comparability among the parties. Another question was about, we propose as possible solution if the party is estimating new categories from the refinement that do not exist in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. The party will, the ERT will comment the party if this new category leads to a more complete and accurate GHG inventory. And one of the comments was that we are not commending the party since long time ago. And in fact, we do in table 5 of the review report. And another comment was about providing examples of the use of new categories in the refinement. There are in IPPU some new ones like hydrogen production, or in energy there is methods and emission factors for charcoal production, which are not in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Another question was about providing an example of allocation rules, and the refinement provides more clear allocation rules for harvested good products and also for the iron and steel production category in IPPU. And the last question was about how what is a good justification of for the party using the refinement instead of the 2006 IPCC guidelines. The justification is when it better reflects the national circumstances, because the party has in-depth studies about the activity data proposed in the refinement, for example, that is not proposed in the 2006 IPCC guidelines, or when the party demonstrates that the results are more accurate and comparable to the range that would provide the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Now the floor is for you.
Well, the floor is for me in this case. Then thank you, Pepa, for answering to the questions. So we received questions from Sandro Federici, from Sekai Ngaritze, an anonymous lead reviewer, and Songlei Zhu. Then I will invite immediately to Olia and Dario to take over of the meeting, and let's discuss the next 15 to 17 minutes the issue on the 2019 refining. Olia, please take the floor.
Thank you, Javier, and hello, dear colleagues and friends. So let's see if you have any further questions for this particular issue, any suggestions, any ideas. The floor is ready for you. I can see Sandra. Sandra, you have the floor.
Thank you, Olia, and ciao to everybody. I mean, I'm not here defending the IPCC position, to be clear. However, this treatment of the refinement, like an alternative piece of scientific information, so we apply the same rule that we apply to whatever other paper, doesn't work. Because the refinement is not alternative to the 2006 guidelines. This should be clear. The refinement is an update. It replaces. So if you compare what is wrong, the IPCC guidelines, I mean, it's not anymore up to date. If you don't want to use the word wrong, it's not anymore up to date. With what is up to date, this comparison what tell you. And you cannot conclude on this basis that one is not acceptable because it's not. Of course, the refinement is up to date. If you want to be consistent with something that is out of date, you may conclude that there is no consistency, but this is a little bit crazy, this conclusion. I mean, whatever country would say, I'm using the refinement because it's up to date. I need even to demonstrate you that is more appropriate to my national circumstances. The IPCC is telling me that is more appropriate to my national circumstances. So that's the situation. So honestly, I won't go for this approach. This approach is appropriate for whatever alternative source of information for all the guidelines. Because maybe some old methodology may be better reflect your data availability, because it's a matter of data availability. Maybe the new methodology is better, but I don't have the data. I have for the old, and then, okay, this is a justification. But, and then this issue of comparability, I don't know, I never heard this. I mean, two estimates are not comparable from two countries just because one is the uncertainty range of the other. there are cases of emission of default factor of IPCC for different regions, for different for developing and developed countries, where one doesn't fit the uncertainty range of the other. And then what you do? You mean that there is no comparable? The circumstances are different. The comparability is not checked in that way. Estimates are comparable when they're transparent, accurate, consistent, and complete. Then it's comparable. The structure of reporting is the same. So honestly, this is, I mean, I feel very uncomfortable with this conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are reporting under the convention rules. So those are the rules we have to follow. And sometimes it's going exactly along with IPCC and sometimes it's not. So we have to remember this. Does Pippa, would you like to respond to Sandra? Or shall we go for the bulk?
Is what you have said. We don't have to go to the future. In the future, we will be allowed to use the refinement when the COP will adopt it. At the moment, we have to follow the rules. We have to follow the rules. Otherwise, the countries will not be, the GHG inventories of parties will not be comparable if we are not using all the same guidance.
Okay, well, thank you. We have Leandra. Leandra, would you like to say your opinion?
Yes, thank you, Alia. I think, I agree with Sandro. And of course, we know that 2019 is the most recent and updated, guidelines containing methods and emission factor. And it is consistent with the 2006 guidelines. And I believe that the issue of reporting, like comparing the 2006 and the 2019 estimates, is not a good way for the reporting. I would go just for the just provide the 2019 estimate, because based on the most recent and updated methodology and emission factor. And I think there is no rule preventing countries to use whatever available methodology or updated methodology there is. So in terms of comparability, I think in my view, it's not practical to compare apples and oranges. Say if a country is using a 2006 guidelines, then compare it with a country using 2006 guidelines. If a country is using 2019, then compare it with a country using 2019 guidelines. But we should not compare 2006 with 2019, because I think it's not practical. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any additional comments on this particular issue, other than what already was said? If not, then Pippa or Javier. Oh, sorry, we have Paul. Paul, can you take the floor, please?
Yes, thanks, Olia. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I think if you look at the consistency paper that was circulated to everybody before the meeting, I mean, we've come across this issue before, back in the first commitment period, and how we dealt with it in the 6th Lead Reviewers meeting. I mean, I understand both Peppa and Sandro's different views, and I think, as long as the party justifies that the 2019 the emission factor approach is more appropriate to their national circumstances, I think it's okay to accept this as reviewers. But I don't think we should be kind of carte blanche taking all of the guidance from 2019 now this way before it's adopted by COP. I think it should be only used where it adds a bit of value to a national inventory. I mean, I don't think, we should be just changing the guidelines. In particular for Annex 1 parties now, it's still KP, but we've had assigned amounts which were set out based on the 2006 guidelines. And we can't all change our inventories to the 2019 guidelines in the middle of a commitment period. So this was the thinking behind the guidance we provided in the 6th lead reviewers meeting. So I think we need to be careful. I mean, of course, where the science is better and the emission factor is more appropriate to a party in the refinement, I think we should go ahead and use it. But we need to be careful that you just don't allow the adoption under the table of the use of a new guidance before it gets adopted by COP. So that would be my only concern. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Paul. So we have 5 minutes left for this issue. For this 5 minutes, I want to ask everyone a question. Are you comfortable with not having conclusion on that issue? Because we have different opinions here, and we agree that if we don't have one uniform conclusion, and we don't agree altogether on what is proposed or what we discussed, then we either park the issue or we'll just not do the conclusions on it. So if anybody is opposed to what I just said, please raise a hand. So I propose not to do the conclusion for this issue. Right, I don't see any hands. In this case, we decide that we are not making conclusion for this particular issue. And in this case, thank you for discussing issue number 1. And I suggest we move on to issue number 2. And I give the floor back to Peppa.
Thank you. I will add something and I will give the floor to Javier. Just to say that we had the same situation some years ago when we had, with the first commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, we had the 2006 guidelines, IPCC guidelines prepared, but we were applying the revised 96 guidelines. So we had the same issues at that moment. It was the 3rd lead reviewers meeting, and the conclusions were very similar to these proposed ones. And I just wanted to inform you about that, and I will give the floor to Javier.
Thank you. Javier, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Olia. Just I wanted to remind the lead reviewers, Leandro and Sandro in particular, that this is an issue raised by your colleagues. They feel uncomfortable when there is no any guidance on how to treat 2019 refinement in the already in the 2019 inventory reviews. It was at least 2 or 3 cases. That's the reason that lead reviewers were invited to have some conclusions on how to treat these cases. Somehow, Leandro and Sandro are absolutely right that this is the best technical and scientific knowledge at this point of time. However, we are working under the rules, and this was already mentioned, under the rules of the reporting and review under the Convention for Developed Countries. And these rules are very clear. They said use 2006 IPCC guidelines. Whatever is accepted internationally because it's scientifically sound should be treated as a country-specific, etc., etc. But this is not explicitly said. So many of your colleagues do not have any other guidance on how to treat these cases. If the lead reviewers conclude that it is okay to have any estimate using 2019 methodological guidance, this will be a good conclusion. So, but not having conclusions is just opening the air to any inconsistent treatment of parties. And this is what you don't have to do. You are lead reviewers, and your main task is ensure consistency across the reviews, across parties, across all review reports. So, and very well explained by Paul. we are working in a set of much more complex than only scientific IPCC methodological guidance. We are working under the Kyoto Protocol. We are working under the convention. There are a lot of implications behind this. Comparability is one of the principles of the IPCC, and entering on not having any guidance on comparability or telling your colleagues in the case of use of a particular method or emission factor, don't do it anything because we don't know what to do. I think it's a bit of mistake. So I would encourage, maybe Olia will have some time after we conclude all the other 8 issues to come back to this particular issue and to find maybe some conclusions that, as Paul mentioned and Pepa highlighted, you had the same situation when 2006 IPCC guidelines were not on board, were out of the reporting guidelines. And you had very similar conclusions of the lead reviewers on how to treat those cases, even recognizing that the methodological guidance that the IPCC provides is the best possible at the point of time of publication. So this is what I just wanted to add, and I think Olia wants to pass to the second issue. We can come back if we have time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Javier. And I can see Paul raise a hand. Paul, can I kindly ask you to hold to this comment that you have? When we come back to that issue in the end, I will give you the word first. How about that?
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. So in this case, I suggest we move on to the next issue, number 2. And Pepa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Olia. I think that we will have time to come back. This was this very first one. I think the one that's the most problematic one, I would say. The second issue, identify, is very similar, but instead of the use of future guidance, is the use of previous one. There has been also some cases of parties using the revised 96 IPCC guidelines or the IPCC good practice guidance 2000 or 2003 instead of the 2006 IPCC guidelines. We provide here in the background paper and in the presentation an example with the fugitive emissions with different activity data in the different guidelines. Here there was only a question, and it was if we could recommend the party to use the refinement instead of the previous guidance, IPCC good practice guidance or the revised 296 IPCC guidelines. I think that you already guessed the answer, and is the same issue we have been discussing right now. The answer is no. For the moment, the guidelines which are applicable are the 2006 IPCC guidelines, and we will not recommend the party to use any guidelines than the applicable ones. And now the floor is yours.
Okay, so please raise a hand if you would like to make a comment on this, or have objection, or have a question. Right. I don't see any hands. Claudia, do we have anything from the chat on this topic?
No, only a comment from Sandro related to paragraph 12 from the 2006 IPCC guidelines, provided the full methodology which included the full emission factor. Is that?
Sorry, it's not for this, it's for the previous, so don't.
Oh, okay. Sandra, I'll put you on the list for the previous one, for the parked issue, okay? Right.
Can I ask for a second?
Sure, of course.
This is the reason that we were really asking not to use the chat for sending comments, because it's very difficult to track if you are referring to the previous one or to the next one or the current. So please raise your hands if you want to intervene, because I see that there are a number of I agree, I disagree, I agree, and it's very difficult to take on board. So we are now discussing the second issue, but still are coming comments to the first. So it's very difficult. Please raise your hands and express in the live version of our meeting. That will be easier for Olia and Dario to conduct this meeting. Okay, sorry, Olia, for interrupting. Please.
Thank you, Javier. This was very good. I can see that Songkil Zhu has a question and he can't use the hand. So could Claudia please help him?
You can.
Hello.
You can.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Songli.
Yes, this is Songli from China. Yes, I'm now in Beijing. It's nice to see you all online. And I don't know what happened. I cannot find the hand on my screen, so I have to be picked up by someone. And then I may add something more background information for this questions or topic, because Pepper has mentioned this issues was raised in one of ERT in which Pepper and I as a lead reviewers. In this team, I act as a journalist and Pepper act as of course IPPU expert. And this question regarding the methodology used in energy sector regarding oil and gas fugitive emissions comes very late, almost at the last second before the window of the raising questions was closed. So how to resolve these questions in which the party used old guidelines, a guideline in IPCC GPG issued in 2000 to estimate the emission from one minor category in oil and gas segment. I think we, of course, will ask the party why they use these outdated methodologies other than 2006 guidelines. The answer given by the parties, I think as a leader, as a inventory compilers, I believe their answers is quite reasonable. In this particular case, the methodology provided by 2000 GPG is better than 2000 guideline because the measurement of a unit is more accurate. In my opinion, is more accurate. But as a reviewer, I of course support we have to keep consistency. I even if every party use same methodology to calculate their inventory, as a reviewer, I will be very happy. So at this embarrassed situations, we just set some comments. Please party provided more information why you use the old guidelines but not the new guidelines. So I would like to recommend the party to please use 2006 guidelines, but we cannot have this consensus. So it's a very hard situations. Regarding to, I think these two issues, this issue 1 and issue 2 are related together. In first issues, party used 2019 refinement, which is advanced one. In the second issue, and party used outdated one. And in all cases, as a reviewer, I support we should go to uniformly to the 2000 guideline, which is related by the guidelines. So this is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you're suggesting that in any case, we should be recommending to use 2006 guidelines, regardless of.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you may. I mean, yeah, maybe this is too. This is maybe too hard for some parties, for some experts. But I think for reviewers, I think this is a way to keep the consistency and comparability. Maybe sometimes we have to compromise something accuracy or other criteria. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. That's why we discussed the issue. And I can see Mikhail Gitarsky. Please, Mikhail, your floor is yours.
Thank you, Ola, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening from sunny Moscow. On this particular issue, my consideration is that the parties are using the GPG or some other guidelines only in case there is a problem with the use of the 2006 guidelines. The methodology is not efficient enough or not consistent enough with the country-specific practices, or the parameters are problematic because of the methodology or practices are somehow different from what is proposed in 2006 guidelines. And that is the main reason why the inventory compilers decide to go back and to use the methods which are more appropriate with their activities. And in that case, I think that the ERTs should consider the approaches that are provided in the 2006 guidelines and GPGs, and consider the country-specific activities and decide whether it's appropriate to apply 2006 or some previous guidelines. And with these, I would support the bullet 1. And actually, as far as the bullet 2 is concerned, I have a problem with the last 2 lines because sometimes it is rather difficult to compare the estimates which are made with the use of the different estimation approaches. I will stop on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. And I would like to encourage everyone to do what Mikhail did. So be concise and please focus on the conclusions. So it will be clear from your intervention whether you agree with certain conclusion or disagree, and if you disagree, what you propose instead. Thank you very much. Any other people raise their hands? Right. No. So in this case, Pippa, would you like to respond and maybe summarize the whole thing?
Yes, I think that here, fortunately, we agree about the difficulty on how to deal with this issue when a party is using other guidelines than the 2006 IPCC guidelines, and the conclusions are quite clear that if the estimates are within the range of the 2000 IPCC guidelines, there will not be an issue if the party justifies well the use of the different guidance that the 2006 IPCC guidelines, showing that is better, is a more country-specific approach. Is better reflects the national circumstances and leads to more accurate, consistent, and comparable results. And when there is potential underestimation, the ERT will recommend the party to document and justify the use of the emission factors, parameters, methods, assumptions that they were used only to improve the accuracy, completeness, and the time series consistency of the category.
Thank you, Pippa. So it sounds like people wouldn't mind to have the conclusion point 1. Singli, do you think that point 1 reflects the soft approach that you mentioned in the end of your intervention?
Thank you. I'm just reading. Because even my concern is also, I think, has been rejected by Pepper in his opening marks. Because in my written questions, I just read, party would like to go back to old dated guidelines to calculate some emission but because this since 2000 guideline is not good enough. But I think the weakness of 2000 guideline has been improved or overcome by 2019 refinement. If we just keep party use old guidelines, which is already very old, why not recommend people use 2019 refinement, which is should be more advanced, having the best science up to now. So this is my very fighting point.
Mhm.
If we keep agree people can use 20 GPG, why not recommend party use 2019, which is more advanced? So this is my very difficult point. I don't know the answer. Sorry.
I think the difference between those two issues is that the good practice guidance in 1996 revised guidelines have been adopted by the COP, and unfortunately, the COP did not even consider 2019 guidelines yet. So that is the biggest difference. So we have either adopted guidelines or not adopted guidelines. So that's
yeah.
And,
yeah, I understand.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mikhail, would you agree or disagree with the highlighted text of the second point?
Thank you, Ola. If you take the last two lines, I would be happy to have a full stop after the word circumstances.
Okay.
In the one but last line. The reason is that, as indicated in the first bullet, the problem of using different approaches, different methodological approaches, lies in the problem of the methods, the estimation methods. And in that case, if the problem with the estimation methods, and going back to another guidance, will result in the issue that the estimates are not very much comparable and problematic.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nagmildin, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you, Ola, and greeting to all. Just one observation. Yeah, the issue is about consistency, and when people still going back to use old methodologies, this will just result in even more inconsistency in future reporting. And I think in all cases, we need to recommend to countries to use the advanced methodologies in line with the decision, and also to ensure that consistency is more achieved when a unified methodology is used. I understand that when you go to an old methodology, that may be because of something that is close to your national circumstances, and in such case, if this value is available at national circumstances, country specific, then it's fine. But all this data normally is updated from a guideline to guideline, and the refinement of the 2006 guideline is even have more updated. And I know that authors, and I think Sandro can confirm that, always go back and look into this data and update them. I really don't encourage that, like allowing countries to go and use old methodologies, just like and we give them like a way to do that. Even we encourage them to that. I think that in all cases we still need to put a recommendation that that we encourage them, or to recommendation to use the more advanced, even if that is like the estimate provided is within the range and everything, we still need to give them a recommendation that they should use advanced methodology as recommended or in according with the decision of the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Nagmildin. I think this particular issue doesn't mean, I mean, the paper didn't mean that the 1996 guidelines, so good practice guidance, would be used instead of 2006 as a normal practice. I think in this situation, we consider the an exceptional case when the party didn't have any other choice, because what was written in 1996 guidelines, or GPG, was most suitable to their national circumstances. And for their exceptional circumstances, we are making this particular explanation, so the ERTs would know how to treat them. That was my view of that. And but in this case, it is most important that the estimates will be accurate, because if the accuracy is not observed, then that estimate is good for nothing, right? So, right, we have this last bit of the paragraph 2, compare with methods provided, etc., that's highlighted. Would Nagmeldin, Songli, or Mikhail be opposed to keep that bit in view of the necessary accuracy of the measurements or estimates if you're deviating somehow from 2006 guidelines due to national circumstances? Okay, if you have no objections, I have Paul and Sandra, but we have only 1 minute left for this question, so please be very concise. Paul, can you please take the floor first? I saw you first.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, I agree with Meldon. I think what's disappointing is this issue should have been addressed in the first review of the second commitment period when the 2006 guidelines were adopted. I mean, you shouldn't really be recommending to use old methodologies unless
that's how
I have to go back, wake up again. But I think you know, this should have been addressed obviously years ago. But the issue here, I think there are some circumstances, I know in agriculture as well, where parties aren't able to estimate dry matter for crop residues burned. So sometimes the new guidelines, 2006 guidelines, has area and then an emission factor instead of tons of dry matter. So there are ways to continue to use the old GPG to define the activity, but then use the emission factors that are comparable with the 2006 guidelines. So, and convert the emission factor that's relevant. So I don't think we should be recommending to continue to use 1996 or the GPG. I think the idea here, if it's a key category, the party should go and get estimates from the oil and gas exploration companies and the national country-specific emission. Or if it's not a key category, you know, it should have been raised as an underestimated potential problem, and then give them 6 weeks to find the answer. And if not, they apply the default methodology in the 2006 guidelines. And you'll find very quickly, if this estimate's too big, the party won't be too slow in providing a more appropriate emission factor for the country using their own national circumstances. So that's just my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra, that's you now.
Yes, I have very sympathy for the argument of Nagmeldin. Anyhow, because Javier is recalling that we need to be consistent with the decisions of UNFCCC, which I totally agree. Para 12 of the reporting guidelines requires, not even justify, requires the use of methods and data that are alternative to the IPCC 2006 guidelines when the results are more accurate. So if we want to cut something here, you may cut after accurate, but not before accurate. Otherwise, you lose the consistency of this decision with the reporting guidelines. It's better to avoid that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we have 2 basic opinions here. One is to keep maybe the first point and a part of the second point. In the second one, just recommend always 2006 guidelines regardless, because that's the requirement from UNFCCC. Right. So would everybody agree with recommending always using 2006 guidelines? I don't see any hands. So in this case, everybody agrees with that. Is that correct? Yeah, Sandra, are you disagreeing?
I'm sorry, I disagree because look, here I don't know why we are trying to reinterpret the decision, but if the decision text says that the countries should use whatever alternative methodology, and the old IPCC guidelines are those, these are very, very unlikely, very, 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 very unlikely that they may be more accurate than the 2006. Anyhow, we don't need to even to take a decision, because if the country demonstrates that something is more accurate according with the decision, with the requirement, with the para 12, the country does, and the reviewer take it, and that's it. So we cannot take a decision that cut half of the word because we don't like. I mean, I like to have always the most updated science. However, it may happen that for particular reason, I guess for developed countries, it's very unlikely that this happen. But for developing countries in the future, it may. We follow the decision that says that if you demonstrate that it's more accurate, take it. Thank you.
Okay. So I just last question to everyone. That highlighted last line. What if you delete that highlighted last line? Would it still be unacceptable to you, or you would be willing to accept that conclusion? Say if we delete the highlighted text. No raised hands. Okay, Mikhail.
I think that we need to end the sentence to be more logical, because my reading is a little bit confusing compared with the methods provided in 2006 IPCC guidelines and produce more accurate. I think it should be results for each year in the time series. That means that we don't need comparable and consistent.
Okay, thank you. So that would be editorial addition. So the sentence runs smoothly. Okay, in this case, I will take it as we more or less accept everything except that last line. All right, so in this case, let's move to issue number 3, and this time I will be really draconian. 20 minutes, no more. Thank you. Pippa, the floor is yours.
Yes, just before explaining issue 3, very quickly to say that there has been cases in which the parties have used good practice guidance because the method disappeared in 2006 guidelines. This was the case of charcoal production, for instance. So it happens that the use of previous guidelines leads to more complete estimates. And having said that, issue 3 is about how to review models or complex tier 3 methods and country-specific approaches, in particular when the party is using the emission factors from the models. And we have had this case in this cycle, but also in previous cycles. And here we receive some questions. As you will see in the possible solutions, we propose that to assess or judge the suitability of the model is not the responsibility of the ERT. And the question was, why not? If this is going to lead to less accuracy, then we should, the ERT, we should judge about the suitability. We are not, we were looking for a word to say exactly that. What we mean by that is we are not going to say to the party which model to use, or if copper is not a good model for the party, or LEAP or Marcal or whatever, is what is meant. We are not going to judge about the model itself, but the accuracy of what is used inside and what is coming outside the model. And that's the answer to this question. There were a comment about the 2019 refinement, providing guidance on how to review these tier 3 methods and complex models. Yes, and we have taken that into account for the conclusions about what the ERT should review. And just to say that it takes the same guidance as the guidance already provided in the 2006 IPCC guidelines. Another comment was that it's very difficult to assess this, and this model should be clearly indicated in the NIR. Yes, it's what the guidelines propose. There are some elements, important elements of the model that should be very well documented and described in the NIR. Another comment was that the party should at least provide implied emission factors to be able to compare it with the other parties. In fact, already the UNFCCC reporting guidelines provide indicate that for these cases of using models and complex methods and country-specific approaches, the party should compare the results with lower tiers and document this, document the discrepancies in the NIR. Another last comment was why not do the same review in centralized and in country? You will see that as possible solutions, we were proposing different things, and the reason is because ERTs are asking for that, because during centralized reviews, it's impossible to review models in depth. First, because it takes time, and second, because we don't have the models themselves as we can have them when we are in country with the party. So now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pepa. And does anybody have raised hand to add to the comments which were already discussed by Pepa? Right. It looks like everyone agreed with what was presented by lead reviewers during the commenting time. In this case, I suggest that, oh, we have Maura. Okay, Maura, the floor is yours.
Hello. In case of complex tier 2 methods, I think the reviewers should be allowed before the review week to receive complete information about this model in order to have time to study them. So this should be a normal situation to receive these models before the review week. I don't know if it's possible always, but it should be a good practice. Thank you.
Would you like to add this to the conclusion? And that's regarding the highlighted part, right?
Yes, I would like it.
Okay. So I took it as the reviewers should be allowed to receive complete information about the model or country-specific method before review week. Is that correct? Right. Okay. Thank you, Maura. Any other suggestions? Jordanis, please. Jordanis, the floor is yours.
Yes, Olya, thank you. I'm just looking the second paragraph, and I'm wondering what about if during the centralized review, reviewer identifies something in the model that has to do with the accuracy. Our recommendation is that the reviewer cannot draft anything about that.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think it's very similar to what Sandra suggested in his comment during the, commenting time frame.
Olya, excuse me. There is a second slide with conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
About Jordanis' comments.
All right. Go ahead.
Yes, it's not about that there will not be recommendations about models in centralized reviews. There will be, but we are just providing the guidance on where to focus during both reviews, but mainly during centralized, due to the fact that we cannot do an in-depth review of the models. And yes, what is proposed is first have a look to the in-country reviews if something was raised about the model, and second, in the third bullet point in previous slide, there is some elements in which we should focus on, and of course accuracy is inside. So if there is an issue of accuracy, of course that there should be a recommendation also in centralized reviews.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Pippa. Right. Okay, so are there any other comments, any suggestions? Sandra? Sandra, you got the floor.
Sorry, my understanding of Jordanis is that he feels uncomfortable that we revise the scope here of the review. And indeed, we should not revise the scope of the review. So, although we may say, and I'm okay with the conclusion that the Earth should focus on some element, you should not say that this should be done only in one of the two reviews, because it's not written in the reporting guidelines that a review expert cannot review a complex method. It may happen that usually doesn't, but let's see. It may happen that during a centralized, somebody is very smart, finds something. Of course, it should be allowed to follow his finding. So maybe it should be so only during that doesn't work because this is a restriction of the scope. We may say that this is a priority during the in-country review. It may not be a priority when you do the centralized, something like that.
Okay, so you're suggesting just softening that part, right?
Yeah, I guess, but then Jordanis will clarify. That's what I understand.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Sandra. And Jordanis, now it's you.
Yeah, exactly. My difficulty was with the only, meaning it's, I guess, with just changing the wording, we can convey this message that we propose to focus during the reviews, especially in complex methods, but not limiting the in-depth review possibly during the centralized reviews.
Okay.
Because there are